Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
and inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. My guest today is Tom Elliott, founder of Ocuroot and former engineering productivity lead at Yext. Tom shares his career journey starting from his early interest in computers and his current role in dev tooling. We share some of his career insights and his shift to New York and working in a small VPN startup. And then his experience at Yext and the various challenges of working in large organizations, as well as the benefits of, let's say, trunk-based development and feature flags for managing multiple environments. Then we got into a little bit of technical discussion on observability and deployment, quality, CI/CD pipelines, and so on. And finally, Tom reflects on the importance of flexibility and prototyping, and also shares his thoughts on the future of AI in coding and the role of human operators in leveraging AI tools. Listen on. Hi, Tom. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Since you already know about us and we had a brief chat, we always start with a self-introduction and then how you got into IT and your career trajectory, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I'm Tom Elliott. I've been in the industry for coming up on like 20 years now. I am currently running my own business, doing dev tooling, focusing on CI/CD, which is called Ocuroot. Little bit about how I got into the industry. So this is something that I wanted to do, since I was pretty young. Like, we always had a computer in the house when I was a kid. That sort of classic story of like trying to build games and failing, all that sort of stuff. And so studied computer science in college, and graduated in 2006, just in time for the financial crash. And so jobs were interestingly difficult to come across, but I sort of got lucky, fell into some contract work, and ended up getting hired full-time when the company I was contracting to got acquired by VMware. So I was there for about 5 years doing the classic, early stage building the login page kind of work, and left there in 2012 because I'd kind of got bored of London and wanted to move to New York. Which everyone's like, how can you get bored of London? Not entirely sure, to be honest with you, but I'm enjoying New York a lot more. So I did a couple of years working for a small VPN startup, like consumer VPNs. I was doing all of their kind of user-facing stuff, which was kind of cool because it was like a bit of a shift for me. I was working on mobile applications, desktop applications, web front ends for billing, all of that kind of stuff. And then I went from there to a company called Yext, which they hired me as a mobile developer. And over the course of 9 years, I got slowly further and further back in the stack and sort of moved to like the back end, working on their Pages product, and then ended up shifting completely into dev tooling, which is really what I love. I found that that is my niche. That's what I love doing. I'm sort of continuing that with Ocuroot.
Oh, wonderful. So when you got into the industry, you said never working on VPNs, VMware, all these virtual stuff. which
Mhm.
was pretty much all systems work. So how did you kind of design whatever you were doing when it all had to be somewhat running in the back end?
Yeah, so well the stuff at VMware was interesting because that was like, boxed software. It wasn't like what, a lot of people working on in the SaaS space these days.
Mhm.
We had to make sure that it would work when we delivered it to a customer, they installed it in their own data centers or that kind of thing. So we had a very long and very involved process for building software, like long periods of design, long periods of implementation, long periods of testing. We actually had a bigger QA team than we did an engineering team,
So,
which I have never seen anywhere else. Although I hear it's fairly common in a lot of these bigger companies. Um, and though we were sort of like we had a whole bunch of servers, like each person got their own server and a rack to be able to test all of this stuff, to make sure that it worked with all the other products. I in that particular role, I was not quite as back end as you might think, because I was sort of like the top level of the stack. So as I mentioned, like building the login pages, the authentication, all that sort of thing. So there was still a nice bit of a user facing component that I could work on.
okay.
Although we did have some interesting challenges with getting servers to talk to each other. Like, I learned that Turkish is the only language that doesn't obey the ASCII character set when you uppercase it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So most languages, you've got like ASCII characters. You put them into uppercase, it'll be exactly the same because they'll have their own character set at the end.
Yeah.
In Turkish, the I is different when you uppercase it.
Oh.
Just the I, and that causes all kind of problems passing keys around.
Mhm.
And then at the VPN company, that was it was a small company. It was like 4 people when I joined. We never got above 8. And so that was much more loose, fly by night, kind of just like, we moved from project to project, just sort of like implement it, get something out, and move on from there. Um, there were some interesting challenges around sort of shifting our model between desktop and mobile that required a bit of work, but like that experience was significantly less about design and much more about prototyping.
Mhm.
And I think that's something I'm kind of more comfortable with. I've sort of moved into a model, and I like working this way, where like rather than spending weeks on designing and fleshing things out and doing a lot of diagrams and things, I'll maybe like write a short doc, 1 page or 2 pager, just to get the goals, the top line requirements in order, and then start prototyping small things to like prove that individual pieces can work. And that I feel like gets me to a much more consistent end state. And that also forces me to make sure that everything that I'm building and everything that, if I've got a team behind me, everything that the team are building is flexible enough that you can change it as it evolves and you learn and you discover new things.
So how is it from working in a big team, big company where you said the QA team was larger than the dev team to the small team which had to do everything?
The it was an interesting shift because like people talk about like, oh, you're in a startup, you got to work hard, you got to be working all day. I'm like, I know that I was working longish hours, but it didn't really feel like that. I think because there was much more of a sense of ownership of what we were doing, and we were a very close knit group.
Yeah.
And actually, so not long after I moved to New York, that was when Sandy hit, and I was living in Alphabet City at the time, and my building flooded. And the next morning, like the fire alarms are going off because there's no power and all this kind of thing. There's a bang at my door, and it was the founder of the company I was working for and one of my colleagues, and they're like, "We've come to rescue you. You're staying with FedEx 2 weeks."
Oh, wow.
And so like going to that sort of a small company where like, we were close friends. I still talk to them on occasion, even though it's been like over a decade now. And yeah, we'd like spend a lot of time together. We go out for dinner after work and all that kind of thing. And it was a very different sort of a vibe to working in a big company where it's sort of like, 9 to 5, get the work done, sort of thing.
Yeah. What about the emphasis on quality?
Oh, well, that was a definite shift, because there was a bit more of a kind of a YOLO mentality at this small startup. So there's kind of like two experiences I had around bad releases, and I guess you can kind of like contrast the two. So when I was at VMware, there was an incident that happened where I think it was ESX, like flagship product. There was a time bomb in the beta version, so that if you install the beta to test it out, it would only work for 90 days. And then it would all the licenses would expire, and it wouldn't allow you to start new VMs. Someone forgot to take that out for the general release.
Oh.
So this thing goes GA, and then like 90 days later, there's like this, like everything blows up, and like everyone's phones ringing, all this kind of thing. When everyone had a phone at their desk, that's how long ago that was. And so they ended up having to cut an emergency release, but they pulled a huge amount of the QA team in to do an emergency test on this release, even though they'd only changed one line of code. And they basically mobilized this massive team over the course of the day. It was a huge effort to make sure that this particular problem would be resolved. Moving to this startup where we were just like, we were like building binaries ourselves and just dropping them into a directory where they could be downloaded. There was a mistake, and this was definitely my mistake. I made a mistake that broke our Windows installer on 32-bit versions of Windows. And back 10 years ago, maybe 50% of our customer base were using 32-bit Windows. So we get this flood of support requests in, and I end up having to do all of this support myself and like responding to all of these people. And that was such a painful day that I then set up full CI/CD, build pipelines, testing, and all of that stuff to be like, okay, I never want this to happen again. At the very least, I want to make sure that you can install the dang product.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In fact, probably we'll get to that because I'm a little curious about the whole CI/CD pipelines and building for that. But how was this experience of with Yext creating something for developers?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I sort of like joined the company as a mobile developer, and then like things shifted, so I started working on the back end. And I was a little bit frustrated with how a few things worked. Like in order to test certain things, you had to stand up like 10 different services locally. Either that, or you had to like run something against the dev environment, and you couldn't guarantee that you weren't going to collide with someone else. Yeah, it was frustrating. A lot of setup at the beginning of it. So I wrote a utility that would basically just start all of these services for me and keep them running and sort of update them when I made changes, all that sort of thing. So I could have like just the stuff I needed to test particular features on my local machine. That tool ended up becoming really popular internally. And it's sort of like it got me a reputation, and oh, you're the guy that wrote that tool. And that sort of like cemented my enjoyment of building that kind of tooling, because it was nice to be so close to the people who were using what I built. I could get like immediate feedback. I could like, I was sitting next to people and I could see that they were using something that I built. And like, when you're working on products, it's very easy to get separated from that. You know, because you've got layers of like product managers, support, you know, and all of that kind of thing. And the only times you might be able to talk to a customer are when they're really, really angry. So, like, you know, it's nice to be close to people who are using your stuff and liking it. That tool actually ended up replacing with something that was significantly better. We started using a tool called Tilt after I saw one of the guys that built that. He was demoing it on a bar at a conference, and I was like, "This is a better version of the thing that I built. We should be using this." And so I sort of, you know, led a bit of a charge to make that shift. And they were doing, you know, maybe a year after that, they did a bit of a reorg and were creating a team that was focused on DevOps concerns like tooling, all of that kind of thing. And so they come to me and they say, "Hey, you like building tools? Do you want to run the group that does that?" And I, sort of jumped at that opportunity, repurposed one of my teams to be focused on tools, absorbed another, and started staffing up. That was an interesting one because that represented a kind of a forced shift for some of the people on the teams, which seemed, you know, could potentially be a bit jarring for them. But, you know, in a couple of cases, there was one guy who really wanted to work on products, so, you know, made sure that he could be moved over and go and do that. And, you know, he was very happy to do that. And another guy that wasn't sure about it, and I said to him, "Look, you know, you're not sure. Maybe you want to move, maybe you don't. Give this 3 months, and, you know, if you don't like this, I'll do what I did for this other guy for you." And he ended up loving the work so much that when he left, he went to work on the DevOps team within the company.
Oh, okay.
And sort of like, you know, he found that niche as well, which is really gratifying.
Yeah, it's interesting when you said that, you know, working with your users when the developers are close by, you're creating something for the developers. But then when you create anything of scale, how do you handle the different environments, the target deployment environments, or the idiosyncrasies of the developers or the teams?
Yeah, one very nice thing about building internal tools is that scale is a much much smaller problem. So got to enjoy that, but I get what you're getting at. So one of the challenges that we had at Yext was dealing with sort of very particular requirements for where we were running our software. So the first manifestation of this was for what we called consumer serving environments, and we wanted to serve content via APIs and generated web pages that would be used by our customers. So it's like people searching for, you know, like restaurants and stores, all that. And so we created these consumer serving environments as points of presence around the world to reduce latency. So we had East Coast, West Coast, Europe, and Japan. And you know, some of this was fronted by a CDN as well, so we had that additional layer of protection. But like with the APIs and all that kind of thing, you basically just needed the data there so that people could search it dynamically. So we had to make sure that all of those regions were in sync and that we're all running the same versions. There were also questions about like, oh, could we deploy first to the East Coast before rolling it out to the others as kind of a, you know, canary type thing. Yeah. And that was shockingly difficult because these things were like, you know, all separate branches of a pipeline and they didn't really interact with one another. So like getting that logic in place was kind of tricky. We'd have to make a lot of different changes. And then we also had to create a European copy of our primary stack, which was running in a data center in New Jersey with a backup in Texas. We wanted one in Europe as well for GDPR, data sovereignty, and all that kind of thing. That was a massive undertaking because the stuff that we had in the data center had grown up over a period of years. And so there was a lot of like little manual things that were done. And in order to get set up, we had to like have the infrastructure team go in, set the stage, set up the cloud accounts, set up networking. Database team had to come in, set up the databases, and then we start putting the applications in. But no one knew if you could, just stand them all up and go, or if you needed to do them in a particular order, because we'd never done that before. We had a lot of debates over whether you could cold start a production environment, which we actually ended up testing by accident at one point. Yeah. But yeah, so that was the thing, and there were always conversations going around about whether we were going to do GovCloud type stuff, going through the FedRAMP process. And that would put even more restrictions on it. You'd have yet another environment, but also one that you could only deploy to every 2 weeks. Yeah. And you had to have someone like sign a piece of paper for you to be able to do that. And so this was sort of like growing over a period of time, and it was just adding more and more complexity. And there were questions as to, whether we were going to add more of these regions. But the biggest question that people always had was, what is running in all these environments? Are they all up to date? And is this particular change in production now so I can demo? Yeah, which was a big challenge and something I'm trying to solve right now.
So with all this fun and excitement that you had, what was the trigger for Ocuroot?
So it was very much that set of problems. And after we got through the process of setting up our European region, I was thinking about what it would take to make it easy to stand up other regions in future. Like, let's say we needed to have a point of presence in Australia, maybe, or we wanted to have a dedicated environment for one particular customer. And that worried people having to do that because they knew it was going to be a big project. And we hadn't really done a lot of the work that we could have done during the main project to make it easier the next time, because we just wanted to get this done. And so there were some tools that I put into place that were, would set us on the path to making that a bit easier. But I saw that there were a lot of challenges in the way that people typically do CI/CD with pipelines, that kind of lead you to either do very, very complicated logic to get all these things working together, or you're reinventing the wheel all the time. So if you're basically given a tool that just lets you build a pipeline, if you want to create a canary, you're going to probably build that in the same way that most people do. But you've got to do that yourself, kind of from scratch. And so that got me thinking about what a better way to do CI would be. And that led me to what Ocuroot has become, focusing on having concepts like builds, deployments, and environments as like the first class concepts rather than steps in a pipeline, but also giving you the freedom to maybe not have things just go in a straight line. You can backtrack, you can retry things. All of the different environments, it's kind of aware of where they all are. So if one deployment fails, it can roll everything back for you. And if you have, say, a service that depends on another service, or you have a set of services that depend on a particular Kubernetes cluster, you can configure those dependencies. So Ocuroot's going to do all the work and standing that up for you and getting it interactive.
Oh, that's nice. See, one thing that we always keep saying is that a fool with a tool is still a fool. So even if you have these tools, how do you get a little more disciplined in the development?
Yeah, so there's a contention with tooling that I found, that there's the fight between sort of like freedom and guardrails. And what one example of this I think is a pretty solid example is Bazel, because Bazel is like, there are so many guardrails in Bazel, and there's like, all these things are basically say, hey, you have to do it this way to be hermetic. And it's all about hermeticity and reproducibility of your build. But in order to do that, you have to learn this whole very complicated system, get into a mode of thinking that works for that, and do all the right things, because there are a few things that you can do to kind of break out of that. And usually it will warn you. But so these guardrails give you certain guarantees, but they also limit your freedom to such an extent. Sometimes it's going to take you quite a bit longer to do certain things. And you've got to be like, going through different layers of rules versus scripts and all that kind of thing. Whereas if you look at something like make or just a bash script, you can do basically anything, but you can shoot yourself in the foot as you go. So there's like this kind of tension between giving people the ability to do the things that they want to do, while not allowing them to do things that is gonna give them the classic works on my machine problem. Where things work in one environment, but you're relying on something very specific and you didn't realize, so it fails elsewhere. I don't think there is a good answer to that tension. I think a lot of the time it's going to be a matter of preference of your audience, and the particular factors that are important to you as the producer of the tool and important to the people who are going to be using the tool. And you just got to find like where on that spectrum you want to be.
What about any guidance on some good engineering practices early on?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think early on, the best practice is to not worry too much about best practices. So like when there's like a lot of talk that's been going around over the last few years about like not adopting Kubernetes too early, because Kubernetes is complex. It can actually be pretty expensive if you're a small outfit. Paying just for the control plane before you've got any workloads. There's a lot of overhead in running Kubernetes if you're doing certain things, and it can be kind of a little bit surprising how workloads scale. At least it was for me. If you're just starting out, you don't necessarily need high availability. You can probably just put things on a VPS. If you're capable of doing that, great. And maybe if you want to use serverless or something like that, that's also an option. And I've seen people chasing certain best practices either way too early or too dogmatically and tying themselves up in knots. Like I wrote an article a couple of months ago about why I'm not using feature flags while I'm building Ocuroot, and it's largely because I'm not ready. Like there are so many ways that you can tie yourself in knots with feature flags, and I've seen this play out. Of like you just have hundreds and hundreds of flags for every possible eventuality. You've got to test them all in combination, and then someone says, "Oh, are we going to clean up this flag that we're not using anymore?" It's like, no, we've got to build a new feature. So everyone's stressing out about tech debt all of a sudden. So I'm focusing on my APIs and my SDKs, making those backwards compatible and being able to make extensions without causing people problems, and sort of leaving the feature flags problem until I really need it. Similarly for things like SLOs, every conversation about reliability somehow comes down to SLOs. But I don't think that they're really necessary for every company or even appropriate. Like this is a thing that was originated, as far as I'm aware, at Google at their scale and with the kind of traffic that they deal with. And where you can have issues is if your traffic is inconsistent, if the latency can change depending on the type of work that people are doing, there's a lot of different kinds of SLOs you can create for asynchronous operations, and a lot of the top line literature. If you search for SLOs, people are just talking about web requests and things like that. And there's a whole bunch of other things you can do, but what I think is significantly better for people is just to think, what is a good experience? Create some sort of an SLI on that. Have a measure of that, and just have something to tell you when it's bad for someone. Like don't worry about the 99% right away. Set up some synthetic monitoring. So because like if you can demonstrate that the user experience is bad, you have to fix that. If you are looking at a thing that says, 0.1% of users are having a bad time compared to 10 minutes ago, and now you've got to dig through everything to figure that out, that can cause you a lot of headaches. And certainly early on in a company, you don't need that level of reliability.
So if I take a step back about your observation on feature flags, would you not recommend having trunk-based development and rather have branches?
No, I would use trunk-based development every day and twice on Sundays. I like trunk-based development from my perspective is just a very nice way of keeping things simple. If you have a lot of branches that you have to then merge, you're actually getting to, I've worked in organizations where you had a team whose entire job was resolving merge conflicts, because you had these long-lived branches that had all kinds of changes, and then you had to merge them into something that had other changes. And it was a nightmare. Trunk-based, you're working in very, very small increments and merging as often as you can, so that if you do hit a conflict, you've got that context in your head and you can sort of figure out how to resolve it quickly. Even working as myself, it's just me developing Ocuroot right now. I'm effectively using trunk-based development. Sometimes I'll have to go off and work on something else for a few minutes to solve a problem. I can keep the work that I was doing, but I keep it small, commit often, and try to just have a consistent straight line of the evolution of the product as much as I can.
Yeah, so for small teams, I guess that works. But when you have a larger team and there are multiple features that are getting enhanced that you need to work on kind of in parallel. But when you bring it in all to the trunk, then you need some way of at least turning it on or off, right? I guess
and that's where you are ready for feature flags. Right?
Yeah.
And this is the thing. I think that there is, for every best practice and for every technique, there is a point at which you become ready for it, and it is the thing that you need at that time. And that's when you should adopt it, and be aware of how you're going to do it ahead of time so you're not scrambling. But when you've got a team of that size and you're doing trunk-based development, that's when feature flags become useful. And you want to be thoughtful about how you're adopting them. And it's so it's not very fly by night. But if you don't want to expose a feature that you've been working on for a couple of months, then you need a mechanism to be able to turn that on and off.
Now the other thing is with the deployment environments becoming so complex, we need to make sure that you not only support multiple environments, but probably multiple versions of these environments. Even if it's mobile, multiple versions of Android or iOS or what you would do. Do you have any recommendations for how to structure the code so that it becomes easier for, at least if there is a bug that you have to kind of propagate everywhere?
So you mentioned iOS, Android also, those are likely to be totally separate code bases, but the experience that I've had has been more around working with different clouds. And there was a lot of buzz around doing multi-cloud a few years ago, and I think that it's starting to come back as a viable approach. because there are now bigger differences, particularly with AI tooling in the different clouds. And if you're an early stage startup, you've got credits on one cloud, you might want to move to another to use their credit. What I think is important when you're structuring your code is to have the primary business logic be agnostic to where it is running in so much as you can. So if you have a service that is, let's say it's a Go program, you have this Go service, you want to be able to run it as a standalone binary, ideally on your local machine, maybe with some harnesses, so that you can verify that it works very, very quickly. The next layer on top of that is putting it in a container. More often than not, plenty of ways you can deploy without containers, but they become kind of the de facto model now. So wrap it in the container. Yeah, you can then test it in the container. You can test it in a couple of different places. And once you've got that, if you've proved that that works locally and you've proved that it works in the container, I would definitely recommend being able to do both of those separately, because building containers can sometimes be slower than you expect. You've then got something that you can put in a bunch of different places. And so, you can run this on GCP, you can run this on AWS by writing a separate deployment model. Either you're using Lambdas versus Cloud Run, or you put everything on Kubernetes. Great, okay, you're sorted. But I think that the model for working in different environments is very much a layered thing. And when it comes down to it, the core business logic should be reasonably agnostic of where you're going to be running it. Granted, there are some tools that are very, very specific. If you're using maybe like SQS or something like that, I think you might need to, be okay. We are definitely going to use SQS for this. But a lot of the time, it's similar to writing unit tests. You try to make these things flexible, modular, and reusable. And a big advantage of having that kind of structure is making it.
So when you have these either multiple environments or multiple technologies that you're trying to bring together, and from a purely deployment perspective, how do you ensure that there is kind of reasonably simple observability built in?
Yeah, I would say that open telemetry is the way to go from day one. This is one of those exceptions to my don't adopt best practices too soon thing. You can't install OpenTelemetry soon enough. It's got to a point of maturity now that it's relatively straightforward to get up and running. I tend to start with setting up distributed tracing first, which has kind of always been the core and bread and butter of OpenTelemetry anyway, because it gives me a visual representation of what I am doing within my application without having to hook up a debugger or anything. So, point at a Jaeger instance and I can see what the trace looks like. I can see the shape of each interaction. And you can, like debugging latency, is so much easier when you have that visual representation, you have those stats. And then you can layer on top, you layer in logging on top of that, and you can have those interact. Metrics, there's a lot of products that allow you to pull metrics from traces, or where spans are kind of the primary unit of measurement. So if you look at tools like Honeycomb, for example, that all starts with traces and gets you the metrics from that. But there are certain things that you want to be omitting on occasion, but you can layer those in, put in some counts, some gauges, and if you have that base, you can point that at any collector in any environment, and it'll do what you need it to. And I'd say that if you're architecting for observability, getting in a position where you can use separate collectors in different environments is going to be handy. we did a project when I was at Yext where we moved from open tracing to open telemetry. It was a big, long, involved project. A lot of legacy code to deal with there. And we initially set everything up so that it would point directly at our Tempo instance, like Grafana's distributed tracing tool. And that was great because we just had to point at one place. But very quickly we found ourselves thinking, oh, well, we also want to like send some of the data off here, or we want to be able to, generate some metrics alongside this. And you can kind of do that with Tempo, but at that point it's ingesting so much data that it's really hard to scale. And there was a later project to put collectors in each environment. And I think I'm not sure if they actually ended up doing this as sidecars. But then you can say, okay, you configure the collector, send everything to Tempo, but also send anything matching this filter to this other place, or like generate metrics based on this filter. And it allows you to set up effectively an observability pipeline so that you can do a lot of interesting things with the data at the point at which it's generated.
See, with everybody talking about developers being replaced, okay, what happens when Vibe Code joins this party?
So I for one do not believe that engineers are going to be actively replaced by AI. There's one quote that I heard where someone says like, "Oh, your 1x developer is going to be your 10x developer, and your 10x developer is going to be your 100x developer because they can use these tools to get so much done." And I'm like, well, then it's still 1x and 10x. Because they're relative scales, but so this is similar in my view to the point at which compilers got good enough that you could use high-level languages instead of assembly to create cool applications. And it's a productivity tool. It allows people to get more done. You have to have the idea of what you want to do and ask it for it, or it's going to come up with it. Yeah. You spend enough time with the AI something as it isn't creative. It's rehashing everything that's being put into it. And so you still need a human operator who knows what they're doing. And the level of knowledge that someone has is going to have a direct impact on the results. There's a lot of disdain around for vibe coding as a practice, a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement for it as well. But it only gets you so far. I had an experience a few months ago where I went to a conference and I learned about property-based testing. Okay. This is a paradigm that I'd never used before. I got very excited about it, and I was like, okay, well, I've been using AI to help me write tests for probably a year or two by now. It's never suggested this. So I said to it, can you help me write property-based tests for this code? I would like to test these things. And it chose a library, it set up the properties, it created the generators. Wow. It knew how to do it, but it didn't try until I asked it to. Oh. And so I think that first off, we're not going to be replacing human coders. It's just going to change what it means to be a coder and a developer. And people are going to have to get comfortable with these tools, and the ones that are used to using them are going to be more productive. In terms of how we're going to deal with with vibe coding and generated code in general, there's going to be an explosion of the amount of code. So I had a conversation with someone the other day about what the outage of a lot of these AI coding tools was going to do to GitHub PRs for that day. But I think testing is going to become more important. I think manual testing is probably going to become important. Like being able to quickly show a human what the code is doing and show them a set of, whether you have like a set of screenshots that you can just scan through quickly, or you have, more interesting ways of measuring coverage of tests, or whether you are, maybe you're producing more videos for things. I really believe that visual representations of what's happening with your code are going to be more and more important, because there's going to be a lot of it and you need to condense it into a way that a human can review. So I'm excited to see what happens in the world of testing over the next few years. And you're also going to need to have really good ways of, like, rollback is going to be extremely important. It's like, detect something's wrong because this huge amount of code had one little problem in it, and being able to like very quickly react to those things, that's going to be a big deal.
Talking about rollbacks, we usually talk about rolling back code. What about rolling back data that might have been updated in the transient period?
Yeah, that's a really interesting challenge. And there's like, the more I've been studying deployment models and practices, and I've been like keeping a regular blog on this for like a year, the more I realize that managing data and managing stateless application code are very, very different things. Migrating database schemas is a challenge. Managing diffs in data, over a period of time is a challenge. And we're seeing a lot of sort of highly available stateful resources, like if you look at things like Ocuroot, for example, sort of like, distributed SQL. The idea of having a single store where you can just reason about it as like, hey, something goes into this store, it's just it's in this big blob of data, and that is consistent, and we have this very complex system that maintains consistency. So you're not dealing with like, okay, well, we switch from this replica to this replica, but everything that happens during the switch, maybe you're going to lose 100 records or something. So yeah, it's not my area of expertise. I think there's a lot of good tools out there.
Yeah, I guess we can go on and on because a lot of these related topics, but I definitely would like your inputs on more like career tips for someone who needs to be still a developer that matters. What are the skill sets that are needed?
If I were to give one piece of advice to most developers, I would say get in front of customers as much as you can. It is very easy to fall into kind of a trap, and I've been in this position myself, of creating your product and building features and working with your product managers, but not really understanding how people are using the product. And the more you understand what your customers and your end users are doing, the more effective that you're going to be at making decisions as to how you're going to build this product up and how you're going to extend it. Because at the end of the day, that's who you're building it for. That's why you're building it. It's fun to think about the algorithms and all the technical stuff and reading papers and all that kind of thing, but like, there is a purpose to what you're doing, and if you can get closer and closer to that purpose, you're going to be significant. Yeah,
that sounds simple, but I guess it takes a lot of effort to understand, connect with your users, understand their environment, have empathy, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the more that you interact with people, I think that the more effective you're going to be in those sorts of conversations, and it is all about practice.
Yeah.
But I think that the biggest challenge is actually convincing people in a large organization to put you in front of a customer. And like saying, hey, I want to be on a call with a customer. Very easy to ask that and it just not happen. And oftentimes, like someone goes to their manager and says, I want to be in front of customers, the manager is going to look at them like they're crazy. Like, why would you want to talk to customers?
Yeah. So on that note, Tom, thanks a lot for sharing a lot of insights and tips. At least it was a little bit of a nostalgia trip of some of the practices that we used to have before all these new technologies came in. And now, even with so many different moving parts, the basic discipline that you're talking about and focusing on the customer that you mentioned now, I guess will still make or keep developers relevant. And that's very reassuring.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure chatting with you.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.